Chapter 2. Don't Make It Weird. The door slid open as they reached it. A hand fisted the back of Izuku's collar, and with a sharp jerk, he toppled over the threshold. He could only pray it was Kacchan dragging him across the floor. His head was too heavy to lift, let alone capable of any kind of defense. The door slammed shut behind them. Coming to a stop at what Izuku dimly pieced together as the center of a room, the hand at his neck dropped him without preamble, and he slumped flat to the floor. Izuku felt less like a person and more like a numb, wet bag of organs and bones. Strip. Now. Okay, that was Kacchan's voice, but the words didn't make any sense. A wet thwap alerted Izuku to Kacchan's tank top hitting the floor, where his face was still pressed. Before he could process what that meant, his own sopping wet shirt was being peeled off his clammy skin. At any other time, Izuku probably would have been mortified, would have squeaked in protest, sputtered in embarrassment, but he couldn't do anything. He was just so tired. "You're really gonna make me take off your fucking pants, Deku?" A toe nudged Izuku's bare ribs. "Just gonna up and die on me, huh? Make me drag your corpse, attached to my ankle, out of this shithole?" Kacchan's words were mean, but his tone was wrong. He wasn't angry. He was scared. Kacchan wasn't supposed to be scared. "Gosh," Izuku tried weakly. So tired, but he had to. He had to, for Kacchan. His fist curled limply around the soggy waistband for his shorts, slowly and painfully sliding them off his hips. He didn't know why he was taking his clothes off, but if Kacchan had a reason, Izuku trusted it. "All of it, nerd. Are you really this far gone? Shit, fuck. Okay, I've got you." Something warm curled in Izuku's chest, the only warmth he has felt in an eternity. Izuku's underwear swiftly followed his shorts, both of them bunching together just off his right foot, over the chain still tethering him to Kacchan. Hands on him maneuvered his body this way and that, until he was seated upright. Damp skin pressed against his back, and this was weird, wasn't it? But he trusted Kacchan. Something soft enveloped him, and the ache in his chest soothed itself fractionally with a sigh. "Don't know why they're giving us this, if they're trying to kill us," Kacchan muttered, the broken timbre of his voice rumbling through Izuku's entire body. "But fucking stay alive, Deku." Izuku would try. He had to. Kacchan hadn't eaten his hair yet. "Just a little longer. Just hold on. You can do it. This is fine. The human body can go without oxygen for like 4 minutes. It's barely been 1. I hardly got any air the last time, but it's fine. Kacchan will get it. He's taller. His arms are longer. I can't do this anymore. Oh my god, it hurts so much. I didn't give him one for all. It's all over. No. Kacchan will save." Inhaling ice and fire and glass, blackness, clawing, digging, burning, choking, screaming, Izuku awoke with a start, his heart racing wildly, struggling against the pressure that closed in tight all around him, until a gruff voice cut through his panic. "Oi! Knock it off, idiot!" Kacchan. Izuku exhaled in relief. It was just Kacchan. Kacchan, whose bare arms were wrapped around Izuku's bare shoulders, bare legs, caging in bare sides. Bare chest pressed against Izuku's bare back. A blanket was wrapped around them both, and Izuku felt warm, although any warmth between them paled in comparison to the fire that burned in his face. This had to be a fever dream, right? Not daring to move, Izuku glanced furtively around the room. It was devoid of pretty much everything, besides the blanket, themselves, and their discarded clothes. The only things present were unlit fireplace full of wood and a single set of clothes, a robe, and a pair of pants hanging next to it. A door to the left seemed to be the exit. Ominously, a digital sign with a countdown clock hung over it, ticking down every minute with just over 4 hours left. "You alive?" Kacchan's voice was low and full of gravel, and Izuku had to suppress a shiver at it vibrating so close to his ear. They were in about as dire of a situation as they could get, and now was not the time to be flustered by the close proximity, even if they were completely unclothed and touching each other. Izuku tried to respond, but it just came out as breathy gibberish. His own voice was unrecognizable, even rougher than Kacchan's. It sounded like he had been gargling rocks. He swallowed and tried again. We're naked. Kachan snorted. Don't make it fucking weird, pervert. Only way to stay warm. Hypothermia. Izuku's foggy brain could put together that much. Basic survival training had taught them to conserve body heat was crucial. Wet clothes were a death sentence, and skin-to-skin contact could be life-saving. Kachan felt lukewarm now, but must have been still pretty cold when he bundled them up together. Izuku certainly had no body heat to give back. That Kachan would willingly wrap his naked body around Izuku to save his life was, well, Izuku was sure if he had asked yesterday if Kachan would do that, he'd at best have only gotten a die in response. And at worst, Kachan would have threatened to chuck Izuku into a frozen lake just to prove otherwise. But Kachan was a hero, so it wasn't a surprise, not really. Thanks, Kachan, Izuku whispered. Whatever. A weak smile tugged at Izuku's mouth before his focus moved back beyond their blanket bubble. Unlike the gray steel walls and floor of the water chamber, this room was painted bright white and lit with strips of similarly white lights along the edges of the floor. It looked like something out of a modern magazine, minimalist and cold, but oddly homey, and nothing like a villain's dungeon. And it was all white. The hanging clothes were white, the blanket around them was white, the firewood was even white. Birch, his brain uselessly supplied. The only thing with color was the black and red digital clock above the door. What's with the timer? Izuku said sluggishly. He coughed sharply, trying to clear the cobwebs from his speech. Fuck if I know. Whoever put us here hasn't said shit. Doors locked. Figure it's gonna open in 4 hours, starting at 6. Trying to not die in the meantime. Izuku's eyes drifted until they landed back on the fireplace. So suppose there's a way to light that? He croaked with a nod in its direction. Izuku had regained some cognizance, but their body temperature was still dangerously low. Just forming words through the thick cotton in both his skull and mouth was a struggle. Not unless you got my quirk back. Huh? What was suppressing their quirks? Izuku had at first suspected that they'd been drugged, but no quirk suppressant he had ever heard of lasted over 2 hours without reapplication. His next theory was the cuffs on their ankles, but they would have been removed. Wait, Izuku could still feel it on his right leg, and Kachan's manacle was pressed against his left. He absently registered that they still had been dragging the chain with them this entire time. What happened to the key? Broke. One-time use, if you can believe such a shitty thing exists. He had to use it on the ring on the floor. At least it was labeled that way. Else you'd be pretty fucked. Oh, Kachan was saving Izuku over and over again. If he had used it on himself, Izuku probably would have been stuck in the water. He would have died. But Kachan could have gotten out of the water sooner and wouldn't be so cold, and he wouldn't have to drag Izuku along or be forced to cuddle naked with him. And if the cuffs were suppressors, then he would have his quirk back by now, so he'd be able to light the fireplace and... Are you fucking serious right now? You really think I'd just leave your sorry ass to die? Izuku froze, slurred and disjointed, as the words spilling out of him had been. They were apparently clear enough. He couldn't even bring his hands to cover up his traitorous, muttering mouth because they were trapped inside the blanket. At least the shot of adrenaline woke him up fully. No, I just... Izuku stammered, his cheeks burning. Kachan was amazing. Was a hero. Of course he wouldn't choose convenience over someone's life, but wouldn't it be better if Kachan survived rather than both of them dying to hypothermia anyway? I just thought you might have had a better chance without me. That is, with your quirk, if the shackles are what's blocking it. We might both die without it. Kachan pressed in sharply on Izuku's sides, and if Izuku didn't know any better, he might have categorized it as a hug. You are such a goddamn self-sacrificial idiot, Shirideku. Kachan snarled right in Izuku's ear, and it sent shivers directly down his spine. You were ready to throw your life away the second the water hit the floor. Should have known you'd pull that stunt that drowned you when you were already started waving your nasty-ass hair at me, saying shit like, if you weren't gonna make it. The hell was that anyway? Ice prickled along Izuku's already cold skin. At the time, he had been desperate. There was no time to explain, and frankly, no guarantee that he would have just passed one for all, only for it to die with the 10th bearer 10 minutes later, and he would have willed it to Kacchan when he started losing consciousness. But Izuku had ultimately survived, and because Kacchan had refused, All Might's legacy was still sleeping in his own veins. If they were being watched, Izuku might have already said too much. He couldn't possibly explain it more now, but the next room might prove fatal for him. Shouldn't he still get Kacchan to ingest his DNA just in case? How the hell would he manage without explaining it? Izuku mulled over his options, ultimately deciding to trust in Kacchan's power of deduction. You remember our fight at Ground Beta? Kacchan was silent. Of course he remembered. It hadn't been very long since it happened, since Kacchan confronted Izuku about getting his quirk from All Might. If Kacchan had figured that out, then maybe he'd put two and two together. I'm not taking any of your shit, asshole, Kacchan snapped, punctuating with the sharp clack of his teeth. Kacchan was amazing after all. It isn't automatic. I would only, finalize it if I actually knew I was about to die. Izuku winced. He was definitely saying too much. He was practically inviting some villain to come take one for all, or, the very least, demand Izuku explain what the hell they were talking about, probably via gruesome means that Izuku definitely didn't want to be introduced to. Shove it. You're not dying. That was final. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut. It was really hard to process everything that had brought them to this. At what point had Kacchan gone from flippantly telling him to jump off the roof to fiercely insisting Izuku wouldn't be dying here? Old confused feelings resurfaced, and Izuku's pulse picked up in the pace in response. This was really not the time for that. He took slow, deep breaths through his nose, trying to calm his thunderous heartbeat that Kacchan surely could feel with their bodies practically melded together, which really didn't help matters. In, out, in, out, in, wait. His brain registered something he was inhaling, something he was so used to that hadn't seemed out of the ordinary to smell. Throwing caution to the wind, Izuku fished around under the blanket for one of Kacchan's hands, wrenching it from its position of holding their pocket of warmth together. Kacchan hissed as cold air flooded in, quickly sealing it back up with his other arm. "The hell, nerd?" Kacchan growled, but allowed his hand to be pulled up to Izuku's face, smoky sweet, like burning sugar. The water would have washed it all away if it was just left over from before they were captured. "Kacchan," Izuku said shakily, "your sweat, it's still potent." Immediately, Kacchan shot out his arm, flexing his palm, but nothing. Kacchan spat. "Can't detonate it." Izuku's heart sank. They really needed to get that fire going, but it likely meant that their suppressors couldn't do anything against Kacchan's biology, even if it could turn off his explosions. That at least was something. "Maybe you could use it to help ignite the wood? If we can get a spark out of striking the shackles with hands against each other." Kacchan clicked his tongue and was silent for a long moment. "Worth a shot," he said finally. He rose from the floor, deftly wrapping Izuku back in the blanket before striding over to the clothes hanging on the wall, naked. Izuku averted his eyes, even if he was a really good view. "Seriously, Izuku? We can fight over who wears what later, but for right now I'm putting this shit on," Kacchan said. As he dressed, Izuku kept his eyes downcast. When Izuku looked back, Kacchan was zipping up a seam on his left pant leg. It almost seemed thoughtful, generous. A regular pair of pants wouldn't have gotten over the chain, but it wasn't thoughtful. It was calculated. Generous would have been 2 pairs of pants. Extra keys, a heater, food, medical attention. Not kidnapping them in the first place. Kacchan shoved his hands into the pocket of the robe and withdrew something small and dark. Flint. Maybe we won't freeze to death after all. The chain rattled behind him as he moved to kneel in front of the fireplace, dragging his discarded sweatpants and boxers across the floor. It would be funny if it wasn't such a stark reminder of how much danger they were in, chained together in a cold, locked room, without even a full set of dry clothes between them. Izuku watched silently as Kacchan rubbed and arranged the wood in the fireplace with sure movements, placing some larger logs off to the side. Kacchan's wilderness training was evident. though it was likely a long time ago since he hadn't just lit a fire with his quirk. But Izuku wouldn't have even known what flint was. He began to doze off, watching Kacchan's methodical movements. Visions of warming himself in front of a cozy fire did little to chase away the horror that was the actual situation they were in. Why was there even a fireplace here? Why offer them any chance of survival? "Oh!" Izuku blurted out, jerking himself awake as Kacchan drew up his leg to better situate the manacle for producing sparks. "Check the chimney first." Kacchan shot him a skeptical look, but ducked his head under the small opening regardless. After peering into the shaft, he thrust his arm up and pulled back out with a roll of paper in his fists. Izuku's heart started beating faster. "How the hell did you know about this?" "I didn't," Izuku admitted. He pushed back against the fuzzy drowsiness in his brain to articulate himself clearly. "Just a hunch. The fact that there was even a way to survive the water room, and that this one exists, means whoever did this is not solely interested in killing us. I mean, why not just chain us directly to the floor if they wanted to drown us? Why have a key? Why have any kind of way out? For that matter, why not just kill us while we're still asleep?" Kacchan growled, stilling Izuku's questions. "Get to the point already." Izuku swallowed. "They're giving us a chance, but they aren't making it easy. A single-use key with 3 choices. Give something up to get something else. There was flint in the robe pocket and firewood. They wanted us to light that fire. Knew we'd have to. I thought there might be a trick to it, something that would jeopardize it if we got the fire going." With a huff, Kacchan unfurled the paper and squinted at it. 0013. That's it. Just a shitty number. "Oh my god," Izuku moaned, pulling the blanket over his face. "We're in a real-life escape room." "Huh? A what?" Izuku poked his head back out, frowning. "I mean, not really, but the group activities where you solve puzzles, and they always involve collecting a series of codes and keys. I think the number might unlock something. In the next room, probably, since there's no keypad on the door." "We're just playing some sick game for our lives. Great," Kacchan snarled, stuffing the paper in his pocket before resuming his previous attempt to get the fire started. "See, Cinnabee, if I had let you drown, I would have just lit this sucker and burned the paper to a crisp. So," it was far more likely that Kacchan would consider someone else's involvement as an interference than admit it might have helped him. It was a small concession, not even an outright thank you, and still Izuku had never felt so touched. Maybe they both needed each other after all. A shower of sparks landed on the firewood as flint struck steel, and before long they were flaring to life. Kacchan coaxed the tiny flames into bigger ones with a delicacy Izuku wasn't used to, but a skillfulness he had come to expect. The nitroglycerin had the logs catching in no time, and soon the fire was crackling and popping along merrily. "Good enough," Kacchan declared. He stood up, stretching and shaking out his limbs, before shucking off the borrowed clothing and once again standing completely bare. The firelight danced in his ruby eyes and haloed the slightly less spiky than usual hair, and Izuku found him utterly breathtaking. "Get over here, Popsicle." Izuku deliberately avoided looking at the nudity so brazenly on display in front of him as he scooted closer to the fire. The blanket was wrapped tightly around his body. With an impatient huff, Kacchan ripped it from Izuku's shoulders. There wasn't much time for Izuku to short circuit over being exposed. Kacchan swiftly resumed his previous position behind and around Izuku, bringing the blanket back to cocoon them both. Now Izuku could instead go back to short-circuiting about Kacchan's naked body pressed against his own. Was the skin-to-skin contact still necessary now that they had a heat source? But the fire began to seep warmth into Izuku's chilled bones, and he found that he wasn't bothered or as embarrassed as he thought he would be. He was alive, he was warm, and Kacchan was keeping him that way, and that was all that mattered. Izuku just hoped he'd be able to do the same in return. "So, tell me more about these escape rooms." Kacchan's voice returned to rumbling again, against Izuku's back, and he hadn't realized just how much he had missed it, even in such a short time apart. Every word soothed the horrid ache under his sternum just a little bit more. Fighting off the sleep that threatened to overtake him, Izuku recounted everything he could remember about the activity: the codes, the riddles, the timer, the chain reaction of the following clues to more puzzles to get more clues until a final key to the exit was found. He described the 2 different themed escape rooms he had done with his friends, along with several of the trickier riddles that had tripped them up. When he finished, Izuku realized he had completed a full muttering storm, and Kacchan hadn't told him to shut up once. What a weird day. It's not exactly the same. This is multiple rooms with, I'm guessing, just one really bad puzzle per room. I don't think this room counts, although there is a countdown clock. Izuku glanced nervously up at the timer ticking down above the door. Which could mean we have a few hours to find a way to open that door, or we lose, which probably means we die. But I don't know where else there is to look for clues besides the fireplace and the clothes. Maybe we can check the air vents? You need every second to recover, dumbass, Kacchan said bluntly, and that warmth in Izuku's chest bloomed again. Was it just a few hours ago that Izuku had to beg for cooperation? Now Kacchan was willingly strategizing with him, and furthermore caring for him. They both needed to get out of this alive, if only because no one would believe it otherwise. I'm betting they're just giving us a shitty break. Wouldn't be much of a show if we die immediately in the next challenge. The good feeling curdled. A show? Izuku repeated weakly. Like these fuckers aren't getting their rocks off watching us struggle to stay alive in their sick game. Huh? You enjoying this shit, assholes? Kacchan hollered, raising his voice. Getting a nice eyeful of my ass? Gonna jack off to it in your mother's guest bathroom? Piece of shit, he spat. Izuku curled in on himself under the blanket, suddenly feeling even more exposed despite being surrounded in fabric and Kacchan's protective limbs. He already knew they must be being watched, but to think their lives were hardly worth more than someone's amusement, to be given the barest rest and recovery only to make the torture last longer. It sank heavily in the pit of his stomach. The clues, the puzzles, they weren't there to help them, just to turn them into a sport. Don't goad them, Kacchan, Izuku says quietly. They didn't need to make this any harder. It was entirely possible, most likely even, that they'd just be killed off anyway, even if they won. But if there was even a slim chance they could get out of this alive by playing the game, they didn't need to stack the deck against themselves. Don't tell me what to do, Kacchan bit back, but it was more petulant than venomous. The absurdity of their typical banter while wrapped naked together in a death trap hit Izuku like a truck, and he couldn't help the laughter that bubbled out of him. A chuckle turned into a full belly laugh that morphed into a side-splitting hysterics until Izuku was sobbing. Kacchan said nothing, but he didn't kick him out of it either. It twisted something in Izuku's chest. At some point, they had crossed a threshold, and he knew there was no going back. The thought that Izuku might not even get the chance to see what that meant for them going forward had the tears falling even harder. You're going to dehydrate yourself, idiot, Kacchan said finally, nudging Izuku's left side, even if you swallowed half a pool. The softness in his voice was bizarre, gentle and incredibly foreign, and only served to spur more liquid to dribble down Izuku's face. But Kacchan was right, and Izuku gamely stifled his weeping with the edge of their blanket. The clock continued to count down. What would happen when it ran out? Izuku hoped Kacchan was right, and the room would open, rather than filling with a poisonous gas that would slowly and painfully kill them. Although, maybe that's just what the next room would do anyway. Doing another escape room was probably not something Izuku would ever be doing again in his future, if there was a future. Kacchan adjusted the arrangement of his arms and legs around Izuku, jostling them into a slightly more comfortable position. Get some rest, nerd. I need you in good shape for whatever round 2 has in store. Izuku was weak to Kacchan's demands on a good day, let alone when the surly blonde had brought him back from death's doorstep and wrapped his bare limbs around Izuku's hypothermic body. The heat of the fire, his companion in his gut, had sleep dragged Izuku into its welcome embrace not much longer after his heavy eyelids fluttered shut, secure in a temporary safety carved out somewhere warm between rival and friend.